few scattered showers elsewhere, a low of 1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Helen Hodinott.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's coming up to 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. This is Cross Question. On the panel with me in the studio, we have Ruth Smeeth, Chief Executive of Index on Censorship. We'll find out more about what that is all about in a moment. It kind of does what it says on the tin. And, of course, former Labour MP. Alexander Downitz, former Australian High Commissioner to the Court of St James, to give the proper title. He was also the longest-serving Australian Foreign Minister between 1996 and 2007. Simon Binns is editor of LADBible, and Robert Taylor is journalist, commentator and Telegraph contributor. Got an excellent column in the Spectator this week on the Falklands War, which might come up. It's up to you though. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to ask our panel a question, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question. It's from Oliver on the Wirral. Hello, Oliver.
Hello there.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
I'd like to ask the panel, is the refugee system, such as we have it in the UK, designed to fail?
That indicates that you probably think it is. Why do you think that?
Well, I'm not sure it's designed to fail. I listen to James O'Brien a lot, who's at a different area of politics, of the political spectrum than you are. And my personal sense of things is that it's not designed to fail. It is more a matter of neglect and complacency with a touch of incompetence.
Maybe it just needs a complete redesign. Ruth Smeeth, you were an MP. You will have come into contact with the refugee asylum system as an MP. It's never really worked, has it?
It hasn't worked. It definitely didn't work in my 5 years as an MP. And
was it only 5 years?
I know, it felt like much, much longer. I had new refugee casework every week, so it was an important part of my surgeries. And it failed horribly, and some of the best people that you would have met couldn't figure out how to make it work for them. I think one of the problems that we've seen now and that we're experiencing minute by minute, day by day right now, is that not only does it feel like it's designed to fail, it feels also incredibly incompetent. There's no excuse for how we've ended up where we've ended up, given today, given what happened in Afghanistan. We're talking only months of 2 crises that have happened, and how awful we know that experience was, and how difficult it was to get anybody out of Afghanistan, and what we've left behind, and how vulnerable people are, whether they were journalists or women who just wanted to go to, who teach other women. We saw so many people have been murdered since, and we couldn't help them, and we're seeing exactly the same in Ukraine. So there's no excuse for this level of incompetence.
I mean, if you're listening to this on catch-up or watching it on catch-up, I've just spent an hour with the Refugees Minister, Richard Harrington, taking calls from listeners. And it was quite an uncomfortable hour in many ways, because he was honest. He's only a recent appointment. He's honest enough to admit that it hasn't gone well. He's trying his best to sort it out. But Alexander Danny, you've got lots of experience in government, and particularly on this issue back in Australia. I mean, you can't sort out a failing immigration system within days or weeks, can you?
No, you have to work through your immigration system very carefully. There are many, many questions, and this is an extremely difficult area of policy. I hasten to add, my father was the Australian Minister for Immigration for 6 years, so I grew up with this issue as a child. You'll never satisfy people. Will never satisfy everybody. For example, on refugees, some people make an application and it gets rejected on the grounds that they're not seen to be living in genuine fear of persecution. So they're going to complain about it and say that, that's not fair, and they appeal and so on. There are always people who try to game the system. There are organised crime gangs, and in the case of Australia, there have been other countries as well, organised crime gangs that have tried to game the system. There are all sorts of complications. So With an immigration policy, I've always said you want to set out the categories of people you want to bring into your country. You want to determine the numbers you're going to bring in, which are based on your economic circumstances and your capacity to absorb those people, and pretty much stick with those figures year by year. You mean change them every year. We've done that in Australia, and that's worked pretty well. I mean, some people aren't able to come because the ceiling has been reached for people in some particular category. You'll always have complaints.
But when you look at our system, and you've been in this country since 2014, so you've seen the Syrian refugee crisis, you've seen what happened with the Afghan refugees last summer, and now this. Do you think, as Oliver, our caller, says, that the system here is designed to fail?
No, of course it's not designed to fail.
Well, a lot of people think it is.
Well, I think that is clearly completely incorrect. Otherwise, they wouldn't. The government wouldn't agree to bring in any refugees. And you've had the Minister for Refugees talking about it. I mean, it's clearly not the intention. But you've got to try to fit together a whole series of different things. I mean, if the government allows people to come in and one of those people turns out to be, a bad person in whatever way that might be, well, then the government's going to be blamed. So the government will always try to apply as best it possibly can some sort of identification of people, some sort of security vetting, if they can. And that's not always very easy to do that. I mean, granted, and it is difficult to do it and to do it quickly and so on.
But they are doing it with Ukrainian refugees, and yet no other country in Europe is. And
yeah, but that just because another country in Europe does or doesn't do.
Are they all wrong?
Well, I think. I mean, I'm not making an argument for right or wrong, but I'm saying if you don't check people, and someone comes in who is a bad person. I won't be so as emotive as to sort of identify. But, for example, a Russian decides to come in that way, claiming to be a Ukrainian, which might be relatively easy to do.
But that's an argument for never allowing refugees in at all, isn't it?
No, it's not an argument for never allowing refugees in. That's a reductio ad absurdum
argument. We know that there have been people who've come in from countries as refugees who've committed the most horrendous crimes.
Yeah, and you shouldn't, one tries to avoid, I can't say that any country is a perfect record here, but if you're the government, you try to avoid bad people coming in, and you try to take people who are genuine refugees who live in fear of persecution consistent with the 1951 Refugee Convention. That's what you do. And honestly, as you can tell from your callers, it's incredibly difficult to get this right. If you're the government of the day, you're damned whatever you do by all sorts of people.
Simon Binns.
I think there's little doubt that the system has been shown to be slow out of the blocks when it comes to Ukraine, and when other European countries, Czechs aside or otherwise, were issuing 20,000 visas. This country was issuing 200, and it's very difficult to square that when it runs alongside the Nationalities and Borders Bill, which is going through Parliament, which Law Society, other critics say is fundamentally anti-immigration, certainly in terms of the scale that other European countries operate at. So I think the overwhelming levels of compassion shown towards people in Ukraine and other countries, you make the point quite right, there is it's not the first time this has happened. Why isn't the system good enough to catch that when it happens, alongside a good measured immigration system that works all the time? We'll have spikes. This country welcomes people from countries where their situations are difficult, as it should, but why is it not doing it well enough alongside an immigration policy that also seems to work for everybody else all the time?
Robert.
Well, Oliver asks, is the refugee system designed to fail? I must say that if you're a Ukrainian at the moment trying to get into this country, it might well look like that. And I was very impressed by the refugee minister in the hour before we've come on. I thought he was very honest and open about that, and he's taking personal responsibility. So that's great.
Well, it's great if within a few weeks he's actually sorted it out.
You asked him to come back in, and he's committed to do that. Is it designed to fail? We have, I think, if memory serves, around 100,000 refugees in this country. So if it's designed to fail, I'm not sure why those 100,000 refugees are in this country. Alexander
You're
mentions...
sounding positively Michael Gove.
I don't take that as a compliment. Alexander mentions that it's very difficult to judge security considerations. I think in this country, we haven't done that terribly well. Estimates for the number of illegal migrants in this country vary. It's around 1 million. So if we are taking security considerations with illegal migrants seriously, then I'm not sure we're doing it terribly well. I think that's in total the people who are living here at the moment. I think I've got that right. It's a long time since I looked at the figures. We are a very overcrowded country, but we have to do the right thing by the Ukrainians who desperately need us and other European countries. I hope the refugee minister gets it sorted within 3 weeks.
Ruth, we all know that to govern is to choose, and if you're in government, we pay government ministers to make these decisions. What if you were the Minister for Refugees now, what would you be doing?
All right, there's two things. First of all, there's a difference between asylum seekers and immigration, and I think we need to be really careful about our language about this. There, but the grace of God, go all of us about what's happening in Ukraine. And if anyone, as acts of genocide are happening on our watch, and that's the fundamental thing. We can't pretend this isn't happening. We can see it every moment of every day on social media of verified facts. So what would I be doing? I'd have a heart and I'd have a soul, I'd hope, because I think that's what's missing from this debate. There is a huge amount that there are structural things that need to be fixed. There's a huge amount here that we can and should have fixed, actually, if there had been a proper review after Afghanistan, which there doesn't seem to have been. The Home Office is not fit for purpose. I think that Richard Harrington is a good man with a heart, and I hope that he'll make a significant difference. But it's needed him to come in, because I don't know what was going on in the Home Office before, but no one seemed to care. And I have real problems with that, because there is an issue here about how we as a global society, there's been a huge amount about global Britain that we've discussed over the last few years, about where our soft power is going to be, about what we're going to do. If this is the consequence of it, that we are going to sit back and go, you're on your own, you can go to Germany and you can go to France and we're not going to help you, then what does that say? Who are we and what is allyship?
Moving away from the Ukrainian situation, but let's look at the people who are coming across from Calais. When you were Foreign Minister in the Howard government, you had to deal with a lot of people wanting to come to Australia to seek asylum. It carried on under Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard as well. Your policies were quite different to maybe some of your successors. What can we learn from your experience? Because a lot of people say, well, just copy what Australia did. But the Pacific Ocean is a bit different to the English Channel, isn't it?
Well, there are differences and there are similarities. So I'm doing a review of Border Force for the government, so I won't get into.
I hope they're paying you a lot of money for that. Not a job I'd like to undertake, I have to say.
Well. So I'm not getting into commenting, of course, because I'm an independent reviewer. So I'm not getting into commenting on the UK's position, because I think that would be inappropriate till I've finished doing all the work. But in terms of Australia, I think what really shocked Australians was that people were paying people smugglers to get from Indonesia, where they weren't being persecuted because they weren't Indonesians, to get from Indonesia to Australia on incredibly dangerous boats. And there were sort of arguments to and fro about whether we should just take anybody who comes and claims to be a refugee, no matter how they come, except that some of them never made it. And when the boats started sinking and hundreds of people were drowned, the Australian public just said, look, enough is enough. We're happy to take refugees. And we have a pathway to take refugees. So, look, I could be corrected here, but I think Australia, out of a population of 25 million, takes 20,000, resettles 20,000 refugees a year, something like that. But if you pay a people smuggler and you try to come another way, and a very dangerous way, that you will risk your life and the life of other people, then that's not a way to get to Australia. So Australia, I think, is one of the world's most generous countries in terms of taking migrants, has one of the best records in the world of resettling refugees. And if somebody in Papua New Guinea or Indonesia or seems a little improbable. New Zealand were being persecuted and they came to Australia. Well, I try not to be rude. There could be some Kiwis listening to this programme.
Oh, there are. We have a big listenership down under. But
you know, that would be one thing. But where people have come from another part of the world, they've gone to Indonesia, they're not being persecuted in Indonesia. And they undertake these dangerous journeys, paying thousands of pounds to make the journey to a people smuggler. Well, that's a trade to cut out, and so we did cut it out. And it was pretty tough, but people don't try to come to Australia that way anymore.
I keep being told that a lot of people in Australia listen to this show as their breakfast show.
Yes,
so if you're doing that, hope you're enjoying your breakfast. We will take more of your calls in a moment. It's 17 minutes past 8 on LBC.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 19 minutes past 8. You're listening to or watching Cross Question on LBC, maybe on Global Player. Ruth Smeeth is here, Chief Executive of Index on Censorship. 45-second pitch for what that is.
We were founded in 1972 to provide a platform for dissidents behind the eye incursion to publish their works. We continue to do that, especially now, publishing the works of people in Russia and Ukraine. But after the fall of the Cold War, we published the work of all dissidents if they live under repressive regimes, and we published Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's poetry while she was in prison. We published Salman Rushdie immediately after the fatwa when no one else would publish him. So we provide a platform for those people whose governments won't let them.
And are you happier in your life than you were as an MP, Ruth?
Well, I get a life, I suppose, which I never had before. It's a very different experience being out of that building, but the one, from COVID to the current situation to the cost of living crisis, not being in a position to help, not being in a position to argue for my constituents, I've really struggled with that.
Alexander Downer is here, former Australian Foreign Minister and former Australian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Simon Binns is editor of LADBible. I always want to say LADBible.
You can say it however you wish, Ian.
Tell us what it is.
It's the biggest social publisher in the world. Nothing to do with me. I'm just here to represent them.
Temporary custodian.
We're part of a social publishing group who speaks to. It's a big number, but we speak to 1 billion people.
1 billion people?
Across the social platforms, across the world. So we have LADBible, Unilad, Tyler, Spot Bible, Odds Bible, Gaming Bible. There's many, many brands, but we're primarily social first publishers. So that means we speak to our audience on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, all different ages. All
I've just gone on
demographics.
TikTok.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Haven't done any dancing yet, and I'm not going to.
Well, we're not doing any tonight, are we?
No, we really are not.
But I think the point that Ruth made earlier was really important, actually, about two things about the language we use for refugees, asylum seekers, evacuees. You know, it could be us if bombs start flying over Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds. That would be us, and where do we go? What happens to us? But I think this is the first major conflict that's being played out in real time on social media. It's unavoidable whether you're 15 or 65. You can see it. You can hear the people's stories. You have direct access to it. And I think certainly at the younger end of the spectrum, when you look at 18 to 34-year-olds, which is kind of core audience for us, that means that they want to see something done. They want to know what we as a country are doing to help people. Are we sending aid? Are we making it easy for them to come here? What's our position on this, on that? What are the politicians
so you
do?
naturally direct them to listen to LBC to find all that out?
All the time, but
Excellent.
only between
you can come back. Robert Taylor is journalist, commentator and Telegraph contributor and Spectator contributor. You've written about the Falklands War this week. Very interesting article. What was the main thrust?
The main thrust is that 40 years on, there is still bullying from Argentina. They still want the Falklands, and we still owe it to the Falklands and to the veterans to support their claim for sovereignty.
Right, let's move on to our next caller. It's Jonathan in beautiful Broadstairs. Hello, Jonathan. Oh, it's a text question. It's a text question. One day I'll do my job properly. Would the panel agree with me that this idea of sending refugees to Rwanda is totally inhuman, unnecessary and un-British? Robert.
Well, I understand that if we didn't send them to Rwanda, we could send them to the Ritz Hotel and it would cost less. So we should explain.
This is a proposal from the Home Office to send people who are seeking asylum in this country to Rwanda to be processed.
Yes.
Now, I've actually flown, I know Alexander has, I've flown to Rwanda. It's a 9-hour journey. You stop off in Nairobi, I think, and get a connecting flight. I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Indeed, and it sounds completely illogical, but there is a but. And that is that unless we break the smuggler business model, these poor, desperate people are going to carry on coming across the channel in those ridiculous boats, and quite a few of them are going to drown. We had that earlier on this year. I think 30 of them drowned. It was mainly young men, but there were some women and children on there as well, and the children really gets the heart going. We've got to stop that model. We've got to stop these people coming across. Now, one way that you can do that, and I completely support this, is to improve the system for looking at people's asylum applications who come genuinely through the legal route. Another way you can do that is what the Home Office and Priti Patel has obviously chosen to do, which is to have an offshore processing centre to disincentivise people from taking that hazardous, terrible journey. Awful though it sounds, awful though it would be to send people to Rwanda, for goodness sake, all the way from here to Rwanda. If it stops the business model and if it stops children drowning in the channel, I think it's worth looking at.
Simon.
You naturally think there's probably an easier way, and you don't want it to deflect from the big issue, which is actually, well, okay, if people are taking to our shores on boats, then we probably don't want to be in a situation where we have people on our coastlines turning them back, actually, and deflecting it to elsewhere is probably going to be seen as burying the problem where we can't see it, I think, and I don't know how that will play with lots of people who, as we've just said, they're watching this in real time. They understand it in a way that they haven't understood human crises or wars or conflicts before. It's not mysterious to them anymore, and I think the level of scrutiny by the public, let alone politicians, on issues like this is amplified, and that's probably how it should be, I think.
Alexander, again in Australia, you had a kind of similar idea to this, I think, some
which
time
worked
ago.
very well, yeah.
Was it Nauru?
Nauru.
Yeah.
We wanted to break the people smugglers' business model. That's what you have to do. So you have legal obligations to people, which the obligations are that you don't send these people back to where they come from, where they're claiming to be persecuted. But under the Refugee Convention, your obligation isn't to turn everybody who turns up on your shores into a migrant. Your obligation is to make sure they're safe. So we thought, well, we need to break the people smugglers business model. On the other hand, we can't send these people back to wherever they were from because they were claiming to be persecuted there. So we sent them to Nauru, which was safe. They weren't being persecuted in Nauru, although I hasten to add, by the way, they came to Australia via Indonesia, and they weren't being persecuted in Indonesia either. Of course, none of these people who are coming to the UK are being persecuted in France. That's important to understand that. But so they weren't being persecuted.
Have you seen the way they're treated by the French police?
Well, they're not being persecuted, presumably. I mean, maybe you think that France is a country to escape persecution.
Couldn't possibly comment.
Anyway, there you are. There you are. You should, if you think that.
No, I don't.
Exactly.
Can I just make clear? I don't think France is. I was being facetious.
I think it's rather a nice country myself. So our basic idea was to fulfil our obligations under the Refugee Convention, to keep them safe, but to make sure we broke the people smugglers' business model. There's no easy way to do this, frankly. And if we didn't break their business model, then our refugee obligations would be gamed by the people smugglers. People would drown at sea. The whole thing, well, we tried this. The whole thing became a complete humanitarian catastrophe. I mean, with all of these questions, there isn't an easy way out. There isn't a perfect solution. People say, well, have some compassion. Everybody has compassion. It's not
everybody.
People. Well, that's a tough thing to say. Somebody, I know him, and well, actually, I don't think President Putin has compassion. I think I might take him as an example, but it's pretty unusual. People do have compassion, but it's not compassionate to empower people smugglers and put people's lives at huge risk.
If you don't have a policy of open borders, somewhere along the line, someone has to make a decision. And
that's right.
Where on that line? I mean, we would each make that decision in a different place, wouldn't we? That's the problem. But going back to Rwanda, what do you think of this idea?
I think it's nonsense, it's inhumane, it's a stunt, and we're talking about people's lives. And I think fundamentally that's, one thing I completely agree with Robert is there is an alternative here and you could fix the problem. I mean, what we've seen is a decade of, longer in fairness, but definitely over the last decade, of a system that doesn't work, where appeals take much longer than they should do. There aren't enough staff in the Home Office to ensure that people have experience. And after you've been here, as some of my former cases had lived in the UK for up to a decade, they had made lives here because of the appeal process and because then they met partners and had families and their experiences have changed. We've got to get to a point where the system works, it's fast, and people know what their own status is. Now, there will always be arguments, there will always be some cases that are the exception and take multiple months or years, but that shouldn't be the norm, and it's become the norm. So rather than have stunts, rather than have a really nice front page on some of the tabloids tomorrow for this government, which is obviously what he's aiming for, to send people to Rwanda. Like, in what world are we living where that is something that is not from the thick of it? Well, it's completely, we're moving beyond political satire.
It just makes you wonder, if they can't get Ukrainians here, how are they going to organise to get people to Rwanda?
It's not a holiday, and I'm sure they won't have access to the first-class lounges.
And anyone who has never been to Rwanda, Alexandra and I have both been there. It is the most fabulous, fantastic country.
I must say, I mean, I'm not commenting on. I've just seen the speculation in a newspaper today. I'm not commenting on it, but I have been to Rwanda, and I've had a wonderful time in Rwanda. It's a very, very beautiful and tidy country. So there are arguments about Rwanda that you can have.
I think your experiences on holiday, or therefore work or on holiday, might be slightly different than.
No, it's certainly not. Certainly not. No, I'm actually quite an intelligent person, and I'm able to have a look. I'm able to have a look at Kigali and talk to the people there.
I wasn't questioning that at all. Sorry, no, I wasn't questioning that at all. What I was suggesting is that when we are sending, I assume that these people will be put in something that resembles a secure facility, for other words I could use that would be more emotive.
Well, in the case of Australia, they're not put in a secure facility. They are sent to Nauru, and they have the freedom of Nauru. They used to go to Papua New Guinea as well. They're given the freedom of the country. They're not locked up but they're provided with accommodation, which in Australian parlance is motel-style accommodation. I don't know in the case
we don't know what's going to happen in real life.
But you can't make an assumption without actually knowing the facts.
Well, Alexander clearly thought the programme needed to be spiced up a bit, so thank you very much for that. It's your turn next, Simon. It's 8:31 on LBC. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. Let's get the news headlines with Helen Hodinott.
Boris Johnson says the Russian people deserve to know the truth about what Vladimir Putin's troops are doing in Ukraine and claims they wouldn't support the war if they knew what was happening. Moscow says pictures that emerged of dead bodies in the streets near Kyiv have been staged. It's understood a landmark global LGBT conference in the UK this summer will be cancelled. More than 100 groups have pulled out of the event following changes to plans to ban conversion therapy. A 24-year-old man will be sentenced next month after admitting to the murder of Bobby Ann McLeod in Plymouth. The teenager was last seen at a bus stop in November before her body was found near the beach 3 days later. LBC weather, rain for the far north of Scotland tonight, a few scattered showers elsewhere, a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:34 on LBC. Ruth Smeeth, Simon Binns and Robert Taylor with us, as well as Alexander Downer. Quick question to you. What's it like being the Australian High Commissioner in London? I mean, is that the best job in Australian diplomacy? The correct answer is yes, by the way.
It was a wonderful job. I had a fantastic time. I've often said it wasn't, strictly speaking, the most senior job I'd ever had, but it was the best, the most enjoyable job. And London is a wonderful place to live in, and the UK more generally. So I had a fantastic.
Well, keep going. not quite effusive enough yet. Right, let's go to our next caller. It's Gillian in Cricklewood. Hello, Gillian.
Hello there. Why are Russian diplomats still allowed to remain in this country? And are Russian nationals allowed to come here at this time?
Simon Binns.
Well, listen, I don't know the answer to that question, but in a totally unrelated story today, Forbes published their rich list, which showed that several Russian billionaires had billions wiped off their fortune, but still had billions of pounds in the bank, and quite a lot of them lived here. So I suspect that's a fairly strong reason as to why they're still here. I mean, listen, they're being flushed out. Abramovich is a very high-profile example of sanctioning Russian oligarchs with money, done very publicly because the football club is very familiar and well-known. It probably sent a message. Will it get followed up on for other Russians who have investments in London? The UK in general, has it gone too far? I mean, it's a big tree to shake, isn't it, I think?
Lithuania has expelled the Russian ambassador, which I think, given its proximity to Russia, is quite a ballsy thing to do. Do you not think that we should be replicating that?
Listen, I think diplomacy is always route one, isn't it, I suppose? And when you start to ramp it up a notch, people get nervous, not just politicians, but the public. People are nervous that, again, they're seeing this conflict in real time. They're nervous of, if we ramp it up, what does that mean for us as a country? What will Putin do? He's an unpredictable leader. You don't want hasty hands on the button, I don't think.
Alexander, when you were foreign minister in Australia, did you have to bring in diplomats for an interview without coffee and then chuck them out?
Yes, we did very occasionally. That certainly happened for all sorts of reasons. But
give me the most memorable instance.
We kicked out an ambassador on one occasion because he had raped one of his staff, and diplomats, he was an ambassador too, diplomats have diplomatic immunity, so you can imagine the prosecution that would have taken place. We couldn't prosecute him because he had immunity, so we just kicked him straight out of the country. I won't say what country it was, but it was a very ugly situation, completely different, of course, from what we're talking about now.
Do you think that there is a case now for breaking off diplomatic relations completely?
I think that what the UK has been doing is completely the right thing, and that is providing a huge amount of military support to the Ukrainian army. I think that has been the most effective thing to do. When I'm not sure of the structure of the Russian embassy in London, frankly, and who's there and how many are there, I just have no idea. But you can kick them all out and it's not going to make any difference. It's not going to lead to Putin withdrawing his troops. But what is making a difference is anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons being provided by the UK, which have really turned around this war. So the UK can be very proud of the contribution it's made, second only to the United States, to helping the Ukrainians in that way. And you shouldn't just pass by that. That is really important.
Ruth?
Sort of there's a head and heart thing here, I think. So emotionally, with every fibre of my being, I think they should be expelled immediately and we should get to wave them off. But intellectually, I think that this is only, as Zelensky has said repeatedly, this is only going to be resolved by negotiation and by diplomacy, and diplomacy needs words and it needs people. We have a voice in that. Personally, I'd get rid of everyone but the ambassador. I'd send a message. We haven't done that yet, but I think that there's got to be we've got to find a pathway to talk while at the same time doing exactly what's just been outlined, which is sending as much military and at this point I'd send even more aggressive than defensive material that we can do. And I'd be speaking to our manufacturers, asking them to be building things, making things much faster than they are. And I'd also, as we've seen, the UK for the first time.
You'll be Defence Secretary in my government.
Oh, well, I do a lot of work still with the Navy because and we've seen for the first time in quite a long time full deployment of UK ships take part in NATO exercise. And I think we've just got to be seen to be doing as much of that as possible, soft power, hard power at the same time.
Robert?
So Gillian asked, should we have Russian diplomats in this country? Well, we can send a few more Russian diplomats back to Russia, but it won't make the slightest bit of difference. What makes any difference in this conflict is giving Ukraine the tanks, the jets, the heavy artillery and the long-range missiles that they've actually been asking for. I agree entirely with Ruth on that. At the moment, we've given Ukraine weapons of insurgency. Now we need to give them weapons to actually push the Russians out of Ukraine.
Well, we have done that.
No, we're not giving them the heavy weaponry that they say they need.
What do you mean by heavy weaponry?
By heavy weaponry, I mean the tanks, the jets, the long-range missiles and the heavy artillery.
It's interesting, the Czech Republic have sent them tanks today, apparently.
Exactly, and we need to do the same. What we're seeing here with Ukraine is Russia trying to recreate the Soviet Union. We need to be wise to this. And if we're constantly cowered by Putin, we're not going to get anywhere. If he takes over Ukraine, without Ukrainians, which is obviously what he's trying to do. Do we think he'll stop there? Of course he won't. He'll then go for Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia as well. Now is the time to support the Ukrainians. They need our help.
Gillian, quick response from you.
Well, I suppose that we'll just have to see how it all pans out. But the pandering to Putin is really annoying. This terrible fear of the great Russian bogeyman. Whilst we watch the Ukrainians die in the horrible ways that they are, it all just seems very wrong. It rankles.
OK, Gillian, thank you very much. Let's move on to James in Hitchin. James, what would you like to ask?
Good evening. My question is, does the panel think that the privatisation of Channel 4 is an act of cultural vandalism?
Robert Taylor.
Of course it's not. It was in the Tory manifesto and millions of Brits voted Tory in the last general election.
Did anyone really vote on that subject?
Well, it was in the manifesto. It was clearly... It shouldn't be a shock to anyone that Channel 4 is being privatised. Would I lose any sleep if Channel 4 remained in public hands? No, I wouldn't. But there again, I can see the sense in privatising it. It'll bring in £1 billion, apparently, into the public coffers. I know there has been a lot of lefty whinging today about cultural vandalism and how this is going to ruin Channel 4. I can't see that at all. They're still going to be having their public service remit. They're still going to be able to make their programmes. They'll just have a difference in ownership. Why on earth should anyone be worried about that? And I doubt very much whether the British public are worried.
I'm told it wasn't in the Tory manifesto.
Well, I'm told it was. So maybe...
Let's call the whole thing off. Apparently there's no reference to it in the Tory manifesto. But anyway, Simon Binns, what do you think? Should Channel 4 be privatised?
It was going so well between us.
It was, wasn't it?
It was. Here we are. Listen, we work for publishers, content companies. You always want to see good, independent content companies giving voices to communities that may not get a voice. And I think Channel 4 have done that very well. I think they produce a lot of good content. It's not for everyone in the same way that BBC or what LBC or what LADBible produces isn't for everyone. Doesn't mean it doesn't have a place. And I think actually some people would perhaps argue that rather than talking about privatising a broadcaster, maybe the conversation should swing to renationalising fuel, energy, transport, health, all of the things that probably don't work particularly well. Is Channel 4 such a priority for the government that they're gonna kind of prioritise that over other things that their argument feel more strongly about?
Their argument is that if Channel 4 is to survive over the next few years to compete with other broadcasters, because we all compete for listeners and viewers, don't we?
Indeed we do.
If they're to do that, they will need a lot of capital investment, which they're not going to get if they remain in the public sector. Does that argument not?
I think you have to.
You at all?
I think you have to. Whether you're a content business or any kind of business, you have to look for ways to increase revenue and change revenue. And if your model's not working, how do you change it? And I think certainly in the media space, the ability to try and pivot your brand and appeal to different audiences or to make yourself an interesting commercial proposition, you can do it quickly. They're agile companies. It's not the BBC. It's not enormous and a tanker that's so hard to turn around. Channel 4 is relatively small. It has footprints outside of London as well, which makes it agile. It's got a big base in Leeds, which is a good thing for the north. And levelling up is all we ever hear about. So I think there are creative heads in these companies who will be looking at revenue streams, how to reach different audiences. ITV have Hub. It's all about digital. It's all about apps. It's all about where you find your audience. Those conversations will be going on at Channel 4, and it just seems odd that the government seems minded to roll into it.
Ruth Smeeth.
On every level, I think this is insane. So, lefty whinging, I'm really sorry, but I don't know if Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat and Julian Knight are suddenly lefty, because they may be left of the Conservative Party, maybe, but they're not typical lefty whingers, all of whom have said that this is a bizarre thing. Nadine Dorries has done one positive thing for Boris Johnson today. She's united the Conservative Party, but not in favour of this proposal. I think there's lots of different elements to unpack, and I want to touch on the levelling up stuff. one of the wonderful things about Channel 4 is that it commissions. It's a commissioner, and it has given huge employment in different parts of this country.
Why would that change, though, if it was privatised?
Because it really does depend, and we wouldn't know, and we don't know yet because it's not been confirmed, but about what the public sector interest and investment strategy will have to be based on sale, and if it just becomes another platform. It
depends on the regulation, doesn't it? Because, I mean, all privatisations have some sort of regulator, whether it's Ofcom or whoever it might be. But they could set minimum percentages of programmes that are made by independent producers.
They absolutely could do that, and it'll be fascinating to see what happens, but also how appealing it will be for anyone to buy it if you've got that number of stipulations associated with it.
More naked attractions.
Well, and one of the things that's most interesting about some of the discussions today is that this government hasn't exactly enjoyed Channel 4's editorial line in terms of their news. Now, if that's got any sway on it, I represent a freedom of expression and media freedom organisation. I am very, very concerned if we're going anywhere near that kind of
Channel 4 News is made
conversation.
by ITN, isn't it?
It is. It
so
absolutely is.
why would that change under a new owner?
Well, they might not need to get their news from ITN or going forward. We don't know what this is going to look like. But there's also the bit that I find most bizarre about this. First of all, Margaret Thatcher viewed this as one of her most impressive achievements. You'll know better than me was the creation of Channel 4. It hasn't cost the taxpayer any money. Nadine Dorries didn't even realise.
Not quite on the scale of you taking the Falklands, but...
And I would also be very supportive of what was written about the Falklands, but it was an extraordinarily successful achievement that Margaret Thatcher believed this to be. It doesn't cost the taxpayer any money. Nadine Dorries seemed to think that it was funded by the licence fee when she was in front of the Select Committee. It's completely incoherent and insane. And at the same time, Channel 4 is one of the largest streaming platforms in the UK. It actually has more viewers than Netflix does now, which is meant to be one of the reasons it needs to change.
Reasonably briefly, if you can, Alexander, please.
Well, I think what you need in the media is diversity. You need choice, and as the years have worn on, I mean, we're casting back to Margaret Thatcher, that's many, many years ago now. There has been a huge increase in diversity in the media. And other than the BBC, which, is sui generis, I don't think anyone would even contemplate privatising the BBC. But
don't look at me.
Not you.
But I mean, I don't feel comfortable with the idea of the government owning radio stations and television stations if that can be avoided. And I'm setting the BBC aside, or in the case of Australia, the ABC. But generally speaking, I don't like it. I can't see any logic. I've listened to the arguments. I can't see any logic for the government owning it. I mean, you've got to raise capital somehow to run these media outlets. If the government owns it, the government has to use taxpayers' money.
Actually, not in the case of Channel 4.
It's not cost the taxpayer a penny.
Well, how do they raise
funded
capital?
It's funded by advertising. But that's why that's why the argument is that fine, you can fund your day-to-day operations by advertising, but you're never going to raise enough money for future investment.
So that's my point. I mean, they presumably cover their recurrent costs through advertising, but they probably don't have a significant capital investment program. And if you're going to compete in a very competitive media market, you have to have a substantial capital investment program.
Okay. Right, we will take more of your calls in a moment. James, thank you very much for that. It's 8:49.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Britain is calling for tougher sanctions, maximum sanctions against Russia. Stop with the oil, send more kit, or keep talking. What would you suggest? John in Bethnal Green.
You keep prodding the bear in Eastern Europe, you will create a problem.
Don't talk to me about prodding the bear. You're almost an apologist for Russia.
You make me laugh, people like you. You wouldn't confront a burglar.
I know I would confront someone who authorises troops to rape and murder, my friend. John, you are weak. You have no backbone. You're lily-livered. You are weak, John of Bethnal Green.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
Vodafone is
with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:52, Ruth Smeeth, Alexander Downer, Simon Binns and Robert Taylor with us answering your questions. The next one is from Matthew in Hinckley. Hi Matthew, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. So my question is, what faith can LGBT plus people like me have in this government, given how badly it has handled this issue around so-called conversion therapy?
Which we covered last Thursday when the government U-turned on a U-turn, which takes a special talent, I think. And, of course, today it's been revealed that the international conference that the government was holding in June has been cancelled because more than 100 LGBT organisations withdrew from it. Ruth, let's come to you first on this.
I think it's really difficult for any member of the LGBT community to have faith in this government. And I don't even think that it's necessarily about the U-turn, although I found that abhorrent, and the idea that there should even be a discussion about conversion therapy and it shouldn't be banned, I find extraordinarily difficult. But this is identity politics and trying to politicise identity politics about one group of people that have have very little political voice. And I just think this is the worst kind of politics. It's the worst kind of attitude. And we're talking about people and their lives, and that is always missed when we have these kinds of conversations.
They have agreed that it will go ahead for gay people, but they said it's more complicated for trans people because of children who have gender dysphoria. And they say there are huge amounts of legal issues there. Do you buy that?
No. And find a way through. There is always a compromise. There's always a conversation. There's always some way to do this where you are not othering someone else. And that's what this is. It's othering other people. And I think it's appalling politics, and it's starting to affect our political discussion in a way that is incredibly unhelpful and potentially dangerous.
Alexander.
These issues are always incredibly difficult. And the fact that they've changed their minds from time to time reflects that. I mean, introducing legislation to ban something and then defining in the law, because somebody will have to write the law, and someone will actually sit down and read it, not just sloganeer. And when you read it...
It can't be that difficult, surely. It's been done in other countries. Well,
you're always talking about what's being done in other countries, and I'm not sure that I'd always use other countries as my model. I think it would be... I'm not saying I'm against what the government has done, but I think it'll be very difficult to get the wording exactly right. In other words, to apply the law in an appropriate and detailed way, because there'll be, what is conversion therapy? You have to define that. How do you define it? How narrowly do you define it? How broadly do you define it? So, it will be very difficult to police. It's quite... I thought a lot about it. I think it's quite complicated to do that.
Robert?
Yeah, I think it's really bad politics by the government and just bad all round. I'm not in favour, as a sort of right-of-centre person as I am, I'm not in favour necessarily of banning things by the government. But this, I think, should be banned. I think it's abhorrent, quite frankly. And as long as it doesn't stop parents and doctors giving advice to kids who are going through a very difficult process in their life, which is clearly really important, I think the ban should be upheld. I think the initial U-turn was right before they U-turned on the U-turn. The
initial U-turn was wrong.
The initial U-turn was wrong. So yeah, whatever led to the ban being in place should have been upheld. And I think probably most people in this country would agree with that.
A text has momentarily distracted me. It's from Julian in Ealing, who says, "I'm so annoyed with you. Your show tonight is so interesting. I had to stop everything I was doing, and now I'm glued to the radio." Live up to that, Simon.
Well, there's only 3 more minutes. Yeah, listen, I agree. I agree with you, Robert. There you go. We're back on track. What faith can the LGBTQ plus community have? What faith can people connected to that community outside of that community have? And I think to stop, start and U-turn in such a way, it's such a miss to actually consult with that community and start a conversation around the issues and that community and bring them in and make it a rounded conversation. It's just a big miss all round, I think.
How does your publication attract LGBT
Well, we attract
readers, viewers.
We attract some people say, well, what's the audience? What's LADBible?
You sort of think LADBible, does that really appeal to gay people?
Yeah, I think the definition of what is a lad, what is LADBible has changed over the years, and it constantly changes. I think it's defined by its audience. I think that's the great power of social media and social publishing and audiences to radio or wherever it might be. They kind of define the conversation around us a little bit now. It's changed, and probably for the better, I think. And you understand instantly in real time what your audience care about. And this is a huge topic to them. And actually, they're more progressive than possibly politicians on all sides of the floor. And they will tell you what they think, and they will tell you what they care about. And they're a deeply compassionate set of people out there. And I don't think that gets enough credit often.
Matthew, would you like to answer your own question? I kind of think you already have, but carry on.
Well, I mean, I'm just interested that tonight Paul Brand of ITV, if I can mention him, is reporting that Liz Truss ultimately took the decision to cancel the conference because basically she decided it was pointless given the boycott. Apparently, she didn't know about the original U-turn, and also apparently she supports a ban on trans conversion therapy, but has been left clearing up the mess, I assume, of Boris Johnson and his advisors. So, I mean, what on earth is going on with this government?
Well, that's a good question to end on, because we haven't got any time to answer that one, I'm afraid, Matthew, but thank you very much. Unfortunately, we haven't got time to talk about fracking. We'll see if we can do that tomorrow. Apologies to Denise in Cleethorpes. Final question from Jackie in Basingstoke, who says, vanilla has now been crowned the world's favourite smell by a team of international experts. What's your favourite smell, Robert?
Well, I live in Tunbridge Wells. You do as well.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. And spring blossoms in Tunbridge Wells will do it for me.
I wondered what you were going to say then, I have to say. Simon?
Vanilla, not keen on. However, I do have 3 children, and my car absolutely stinks when they've been in it. So the vanilla car air freshener that hangs within it is taken on a special resonance for me. So I kind of get it. Creosote takes me back to my childhood.
I love
creosote on a fence.
Yeah.
I love that.
Me too. Alexander?
It's an incredibly hard question to answer. I like the smell when you extinguish a candle. I love the smell of the smoke. I know that's eccentric. When I was a child, I would always ask my parents if I could blow out the candles so I could, with my hand, push the smell of the smoke.
Your drug of choice.
My drug of choice. The only drug I've used, other than the occasional drink.
Ruth?
The smell of the sea. It's immediately calming and relaxing, and good. And if you can add vinegar on chips to that at the same time, then all is well.
You've let yourself down there.
Because there is something about fish and chips at the seaside. So it is the smell.
Not with vinegar.
Burnt wood, that smell you get when you go into some restaurants or pubs. That sort of... Anyway. Right, thank you very much indeed. Alexander Downer, Ruth Smeeth, Simon Binns and Robert Taylor. It's been a great hour. Thank you very much for joining us. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about divorce, because from tomorrow you can get a no-fault divorce. I wonder what difference that will make. What difference would it have made to your divorce? Do you welcome this move, or do you think it is too easy to get divorced in this country nowadays? It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The Ukrainian president has told the UN Security Council that Russia is trying to turn his country and its citizens into silent slaves. The Kremlin denies deliberately targeting civilians and has accused Ukraine of staging photos of bodies in the streets surrounding Kyiv. The Telegraph's defence and political correspondent Danielle Sheridan has spent time in Bucha and has told LBC what she saw.
The most harrowing part of it all are that there are mass graves, simply because there just isn't enough space in the morgues and the crematorium to put the victims. They have been piled into basically like makeshift trenches.
The Refugees Minister, Lord Harrington, has admitted the Home Office wasn't geared up for the